Good evening. This is R Avraham Shira from Nar Shalom in Jerusalem. Tonight we're beginning a new series called Questions and Answers. And we're going to deal with questions that we often receive online from various listeners all over the world. People that have questions from every aspect of life. And they want to know what the Torah has to say about such things, especially through the filter or the lens of the Kabbalah. Tonight's first question is tremendously controversial. It's a source of pain for a lot of people. It's a source of confusion. It's a source of anger, misunderstanding, and a lot of inhumanity to man. The subject, of course, is gender identity, as seen through the eyes of the Kabbalah. The question that came in, how does the Kabbalah look at gender identity and homosexuality? Well, of course, everybody knows the general injunction in the Torah, in the Bible, about homosexuality. But we're not going to deal with that injunction right now. What we're going to deal with is the roots of the subject. And these roots are explained to us very clearly in the book of Reincarnation of Rabbi Chaim Vital. Now, Rabbi Chaim Vital was one of the greatest modern Kabbalists. He lived around 500 years ago in the holy city of Tzfat, here in Israel. Rabbi Chaim was the main student who wrote down all the works of the holy Ari HaKadosh. And in his book on reincarnation, he discusses some of these issues. And I think when we understand the bigger picture about gender identity, it's going to help us heal. It's going to help us understand one another. And it's going to help us ultimately understand ourselves and creation as a unified system through which the energy of the Creator flows. Okay, so the first idea we have to understand is that God does not have a gender. Hashem is not male and he's not female. We refer to him as a male figure most often because we identify him as the giver. Now in Kabbalah, there are two basic flows of energy. There's giving energy and receiving energy. Both are skills that we need to develop as human beings. Both of them are skills that we are not necessarily given when we're raised. Most children, most babies, when they're born, are extremely selfish because they need to be, because they want to live and survive. But remember, a baby is already born, male or female, in their external body, in the body that they were given to experience life in this world. At the highest level, Hashem created the concept of the masculine and the feminine. This creation of masculine and feminine happened in an extremely high place in the worlds of Kabbalah. They're called the Partsuf of Abba and Ima. They follow the Partsuf of Arich Anpin and Atik Yomin. If these names are unfamiliar to you, well, I'm sure they're unfamiliar to a lot of people. The idea, though, is that there are energy centers through which God contracts infinite light and makes it available to human beings, and to all of nature for that matter. Now, these energy centers begin much higher than human consciousness. And at a certain point, there was a separation of the unified light into two halves, into a masculine aspect, a giving aspect, which we call the upper father, Abba Elyon, and the receiving aspect called the feminine aspect, which is Ima Ila'ah, or the upper mother. Now again, these are energy spheres. They are not people, they are not human, they are not physical. They are energies as the infinite light is contracting itself down into vessels through which humanity can be created and we can be given the gift of free choice. All right. So first rule, Hashem is not gender bound at all. Chas v'shalom. Second rule, that the upper worlds are built on this male-female dichotomy. Now, because human beings are made in the image of God, guess what? We are also male and female. We are born as a male or a female, again, as I said, in our body. But in heaven, at the root of our souls, we are both male and female. And so when you hear the old cliche about, oh, I want to meet my other half. Well, actually in Kabbalah, that is a very honest, accurate desire. Because each soul at its inception in the upper worlds is one. Everybody, you and me, male and female, in this world, we are actually part of a dyad in Shemayim before we are even split. Before we, just like God, split himself into these two paradigms called the upper and father and the upper mother, so too we are one. And then before we are actually born, the male and female aspects of our souls are split, and then they come down in different places and often at different times. And then the journey is to reunite here in this world. Now, anybody who follows romantic movies won't have a hard time with this concept at all. However, what happens in the garden, the primordial setting of the first speaking human being with a soul that has the ability to connect to the infinite, who we call Adam and Chava. Adam and Chava, Rabbi Chaim tells us, were one. They weren't male, they weren't female, they were both. And if you look at it, it's a very beautiful and interesting idea. This hermaphrodite structure of the soul explains why some people want to be both. And I remember as a kid growing up, there was this movement in the 70s. I thought it was a little bit out there for me, but that people wanted to not look male and not look female. They wanted to kind of look both. Now, of course, that could be a fashion statement and that's an exaggeration. But you see, in Torah, and especially in Kabbalah, anything that we find a physical phenomenon has a root in the spiritual world. So even the idea of a hermaphrodite is found in the root of our soul. And that's how somebody can actually come up with the idea of being such a thing. Now, we've all heard about Siamese twins, where people are born two souls in one body with two heads. And I've never heard if such a combination was born where one half was male and one was female. If anybody has heard or can look it up online and report back to us, it'd be very interesting. Okay, but without that said, regardless, that kind of gives us an idea that we come into this world as missing something. We're missing that other part of us. Some men are missing a certain aspect of their feminine side, and some women are missing an aspect of their masculine side. And as a matter of fact, all of us are. So where does the gender identity conflict begin? Well, Rabbi Chaim lists for us several situations where people actually have to reincarnate as their opposite gender soul. And this is not considered a vacation. This is not considered a reward from heaven. But rather, he tells us that when a male commits a crime against a female, that if that male soul does not repent, does not return and make amends and fix what he's damaged, he can be faced with the option of returning into the world as a female in a female body to experience the suffering that he caused to a female in a previous lifetime. Now that sounds bizarre, right? But it can work both ways as well. If a female soul causes harm, suffering to a male soul, that female soul can come back into a male body. It's a female soul, but in a male body, to experience the suffering of that person or that paradigm of experience. So, wait a minute here. If this is all true, And I'm sure some of you might say, this is crazy. And, before I learned these things for the last 30 years, I would have agreed with you. But when you get into the practice and the prayers and the meditations of the Kabbalah, and your soul starts to open up, you see how much sense it actually makes. And Kabbalah is called divine science. Now, so if a soul is reincarnated, a female soul comes back in a male body, or a male soul comes back in a female body, we can understand why people don't feel right in their gender. Doesn't that make sense? How many times have you heard a person said, I've always felt like a man, or I've always felt like a girl, when they were the opposite gender? Well, that's because there's the root of that truth within them. However, this is not the only case that a soul can reincarnate and into different forms. We also have a situation where the first man, Adam and Eve, received what the Kabbalah calls a union with the primordial snake. Now, again, we have to remove our old world religion ideas about the Garden of Eden, because it was a non-physical plane. First of all, the Arizal writes that there was no such thing as the physical world until Adam and Eve actually experienced the duality of consciousness by being bitten, so to speak, right, by the snake. But what was that bite all about? Well, Rabbi Chaim explains for us that when the primordial snake seduced Eve, he wasn't just trying to make her eat the apple. The Torah, the Zohar teaches us that he wanted Eve for himself. And he wanted Adam out of the picture. Now, that sounds like a script we've heard before, right? But what happened was, when we're told that she ate from the apple, that's a metaphor for Adam actually unifying with her soul. Remember, they're not physical. It's very easy to unify with another soul when you don't have a body in the way, because they're lights, and lights interchange and interflux between each other. It's only the body that keeps us separate altogether. And if you go out of your body, you can pass through a wall or somebody else's soul, just like they do in the movies. Where they get it from? You don't think the Hollywood writers read Kabbalah in English nowadays? Of course they do. Okay. But what happened was that every human being is born with two impulses: a good impulse and a bad impulse. Now, good and bad are, of course, terms that are heatedly argued in the modern world. People want to say there is no good and bad. Some people say it's all good, and so you do whatever you want. And these things are violations of the philosophy of the Torah and the Kabbalah, because in their roots in heaven, everything is all good. But when they get expressed down here in the vessels of this world, then there's a split again between what's called good and what's called evil. Now, good is order in a general sense, and chaos is called evil. Now, chaos just means things aren't in their place. Now, what happens to the soul? What happens to Adam and Eve, Chava and Adam, is that when the snake unifies with Chava, he also unified with Adam. And what happened? He mixed up their souls together in order that Adam received part of Eve's soul and Eve received part of Adam's soul. And so Adam, whose natural built-in inclination was to be with his wife, had an additional desire added to it because of the snake. And that was Eve's desire for man. Do you hear this? And that the same thing happened to Eve. That Eve's natural inclination was for her husband. But when the snake came along and mixed up the powers, she got a little dose of Adam's desire for women. And that explains another huge piece about homosexuality. That we are born with inclinations. All of us. And this should reduce a lot of shame that people bear. People, as a therapist, I can tell you, a lot of people are sitting on a lot of shame. And one of the biggest shames is gender identity and attraction to the same sex. And certainly that's why there's people marching in the streets. I think it's Gay Pride Month or something. I heard, and then there's arguments between both sides and they're fighting about everything. And it's just really, it's really horrible because there's so much more important things in the world, I believe, to focus on than what you do in the bedroom. Okay? It's private. And I don't think it should be out on display in the streets of the world. Okay, well, I'm not the only one, and there are other opinions, and again, that's not our purpose here tonight. We're answering a question from a very sincere person who wants to know something about how the Kabbalah looks at these issues. But when we see that these desires are built into us, and that our souls are mixtures, composites of these different desires, then it makes sense that somebody could actually want to be with someone of their same gender. Okay. However, the Torah comes along and says, no, you can't sleep with the same gender. If you're a man, it's considered a very severe penalty. If you're a woman, it's considered less severe, but also highly, shall we say, marginalized. Why? Well, because when we go back to the idea of order and chaos, the world was chaos for 2,000 years. The first 2,000 years, anybody could do anything they wanted. There was no police force. There was no 911. There was the stronger guy and the weaker guy, the stronger woman and the weaker one. And there was no order and there was no structure. Avraham Avinu came along, Abraham, the first patriarch, and he said, we need order, we need structure, we have a tradition from Adam. Now, they didn't have the Torah as we know it, but they had a monotheistic tradition from Adam. And remember, Adam was the first prophet because God spoke to him, and he spoke back. They had a conversation. So, the whole purpose of creation is to bring order to chaos. And part of the way that the Torah attempts to do that is to give society structure through proper, healthy relations between men and women. So you say, well, then why does the Torah get so extreme that if a man sleeps with a man that they get put to death? First of all, there's no evidence that this ever happened. There are many mitzvahs in the Torah that the rabbis say that it never happened, but lo natnu ela lidrasha bo. That the reason they gave certain mitzvot in the Torah are in order for us to explore the issue, not for us to know that such a thing happened or would happen. So that's very important to remember. The Torah is not a cruel document seeking revenge on sinners. Like religion, that old-time religion has been poisoning us all for thousands of years. I'm sorry, it never happened. Just like the killing somebody for bowing down to a statue. Or these things almost never happen, maybe in a very rare cases. Or putting a whole city to fire and flames because they worship statues or they worship constellations, etc. These things didn't happen. But the Torah gives us laws because there needs to be parameters in society. Okay, because and the evidence for this is very simple. That in the Tanakh we see there were several kings that when they took over the kingship in Israel, they knocked down the trees that people worshipped. Why were people worshiping trees? Because we know that angels hang out on trees. And if you see an angel in a tree, you're going to worship that tree if you don't know any better. And people would worship mountains. Rabbi Akiva says there was not a mountain in Israel that the people didn't bow down to. Because if you see the soul of the mountain, you're going to bow down to it. Because we don't understand the spiritual power that lies behind physical matter. And if you have the eyes to see it, it's going to blow your mind. And this is what they were facing 2,000 years ago. They were facing such a revelation of spiritual power that they were torn because that was their free choice. Go to the Beit HaMikdash or go to my friend's neighborhood altar and we can go bow down over there. My friend has a nicer barbecue. The Kohanim are tough. I have to go all the way to Jerusalem. These things are real, okay? And so when certain kings took over the kingship in Israel, they would have to cut down those trees because they were worshipped and burn them. And they had to knock down the altars that they used to bring sacrifices to various entities. As we spoke in one of our earlier shirim, they used to worship Draco, which is a constellation that is called the pole star. And it's actually a collection of stars that surrounds the entire axis of the Earth and the galaxy and the sun in which we live. And so when we understand that, we can understand why they would worship these powers. Because that looked to be the evidential power that there was. But the idea of one infinite, eternal God is way beyond our imagination. Okay, with all that said, some of the kings, I remember 3 of them. Asa was one of them. And 2 other great-grandsons of King David. They didn't put homosexuals to death. That's just an exaggerated notion. What they did was they gave them cities. They gave them their own cities. Now, am I advocating this? No. Who am I? I'm not a politician, and I'm not a geographic designer of societies. But I know that the Torah has answers to today's problems if we're willing to look in the right way. Now, most homosexuals say, I'm not moving. Why should I leave my home? Why should I go out of the city? And I'm not suggesting that. I'm only suggesting that we open our minds to understand ourselves. To understand that when a person feels torn between his gender, it might well be because he's a composite soul. And that's really where I have to look. And that's where I can find my peace. Okay? So for anybody that's struggling with these issues, it's time to back down and to meditate and to take some time alone and to really sit with myself and ask myself a question: who am I? Or what am I made of? Or who made me? And why do I feel this way? Now, I'm sure people have. And it's not an easy thing. And I've had clients that have struggled with these issues for years. You know, I had a client who changed his sex and then wanted to change back again because he wanted to have babies. You know, it's a hard way to live, you know, to go through these subjects. And I think what we need is compassion and understanding, and we need knowledge. And I don't believe that any systematic body of knowledge can answer all the questions like the Kabbalah can. So I hope this has been helpful. There is much more to be said. And in the future, perhaps we'll open up the books and look inside and read some of the language of the great Kabbalists of the past. But I've tried to give over here as a shortened version of some of these ideas. And I hope that it's helpful to people to really build compassion for themselves and others, and to get off this me or you, this us and them, this conflictual stance that only creates strife. And this reason that there's strife is because I don't have inner peace. And instead of dealing with my lack of inner peace, I look outside in the world and find more fights to fight. And I don't think that's really why we're here. Okay, so I hope that touches the first question. I want to thank Reb Ariel Ephraim Weisberg, who is my web manager, and he's made everything possible here. For the last several months, we've been working together. And without him, I would be, sitting in yeshiva with opening books and talking to friends there. But because of his expertise and his insight and sensitivity, we've been able to bring some of these classes to Facebook and to YouTube and to the other platforms that are available nowadays. And so I want to thank him and thank all of our followers who do tune into our classes on a regular basis. It's a wonderful thing to be able to actualize this dream of sharing Torah all over the world. Okay, so another question that came in, and we've got a lot of followers from Africa, and they seem to be very sincere people, and they come from all different countries in Africa. I can name at least half a dozen, and they write very interesting questions about a simple relationship with God. And several years ago, I started outlining a series of essays called Universal Monotheism, because I grew up with Christian friends, Catholic friends. I had very few Jewish friends, and my Christian friends, I really liked them, you know. And it was, even though they said, well, you guys killed JC and you guys did this, and I was like, come on, guys, it's 2,000 years ago, let's get over it. But really, in my heart, I had very close, warm attachments with a lot of what I call good Christians. And, you know, someone went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I have all these people in my community who are Christians, and they always ask me about Judaism and Jesus and all the conflicts. And the Rebbe's answer was, just tell Christians to be good Christians. And being good means I don't seek battles. I don't seek fights. I don't seek conflict. I don't seek to convert people. I seek the truth in my own life and in my own heart. Okay, and so I see this. We literally must have 1,000 followers from Africa. They write in. They look like very sincere people. And you know, how did they get to be Christian? Well, we know how they did, because the Christian missionaries from France and England and Holland went to the African continent between 150 and 200 years ago and began to spread the gospel. And without judging them and what they did and what they didn't do and how they affected African society, if you're interested in those ideas, you can read the works by Achebe and other authors from Africa who will tell you exactly what happened. But what I'm interested in is human beings finding peace and love in their hearts for God. Because that's the only place we'll get healed, folks. Now, you could say, okay, Avraham, that's a very nice religious position, but you know what? I've gone to a lot of therapists. I've gone to healers. I've gone to all types of spiritual people, had conversations, sought help for myself over periods in my life. And it always seems to come back to the same thing. Hashem hu rofecha. God is the real healer. It's His energy that touches the human soul and makes us generate self-healing. Now, on our YouTube channel, I believe there's a series of classes called The Self-Healing Universe. Some of those classes are a bit old, but they're still worth listening to, because we live in a self-healing universe. The nature of nature is to always seek to restore its balance. And healing is based on balance. Okay, so the question we have here is, how can I make God happy? What a wonderful question. How do I serve Him? How more innocent and pure can you be? How do I make God happy? Now, there's a lot of answers that you can give for that question. And you know, the first thought I had, though, when I read this question was, how do I know that God is happy with me? Okay, it's one thing to ask, how do I do it to make God happy? But how will I know it? Maybe I'll do something and I won't know anything. Maybe I'll do a good deed and I won't suddenly wake up and feel wonderful. I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people. You know, you do a good deed and someone puts you down, or someone cuts it in half, and somebody maligns what you do when you try to be good. Okay. Well, the answer, I believe, is like this. How do I make God happy? I look for things that nobody else could do in the moment. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whether you're at the top of, a skyscraper in Manhattan, or you're, and down in the Bowery, whether you're on the desert. We were just out in the desert today in Israel. It looked like there's nobody. A little Bedouin tent over here, a ruin of some stones over here. Wherever you are, we have to look for that deed that no one else can do. And that's how you can make God happy. Because when you seek out to do something that no one else can do, you're making yourself a messenger. You're making yourself into a vessel to deliver something special to somebody else. And you can say, well, Avraham, I'm out here in the desert. What can I do? You know what? It sounds ridiculous. But, I was raised in the 70s when they actually taught us to pick up litter off the ground. In Eretz Israel, in the Holy Land, I think it's a wonderful thing to pick up litter. Because obviously, it's one of those classes that everybody took off early. No, but really, look for those little things that you can do that make a difference in people's lives. And even if there's no people involved. A friend of mine once saw a guy in a wheelchair, and he just went over, and they were on the sidewalk in Jerusalem, and the guy was just sitting there in his wheelchair. And my friend just impulsively went and gave him a hug. You should have seen the look on the guy's face. That look on his face was worth any visit to heaven. Because he saw the transformation in a moment. And that's how life is really lived. Transforming little moments. So you might say, how do I make God happy? I become religious and I do the whole Torah and I learn the whole Gemara and I, pray 8 hours a day. Those things will make God happy. But they're a long way off before I can get to those levels. Whereas here and now, I can make little moves to help everyone else. And this is not really a new idea. There's many books out there nowadays about this idea of transforming the moment and living in the moment. But when we attach it to the idea, my real goal is just to make the Creator happy that He created me, that seems to be worthwhile unto itself. In the old days when I was checking out New Age thought and New Age authors and speeches and talks, etc., they used to say, it's good enough reason to be good. That's a good enough reason to be good because it's good. And I liked that when I first heard that. It's good enough reason to be good to be good. I can keep God in the back part of my room and, keep God in church on Sunday, keep God in temple on Friday night. But you know what? It doesn't hold up, those philosophies. Because if it was just enough good to be good, what happens when you get tested? What happens when somebody wants you to do something that's not good, or you're going to suffer? What happens when someone puts a gun to your head and says, you kill this guy or I'll kill you? You don't think that happens? Sure it does. And that's an exaggerated example, but still. The reason we have the Torah is because we need to have a collection of practices that help us answer these kinds of questions. So it is good, a good reason to be good is because you create goodness. But I need the Torah to tell me when, okay, we stop here. When someone says, deny God. When someone says, tell me there is no God or I'll shoot you, I'll say, go ahead, baby, shoot. I'm not going to deny the truth. And I read a story about a Kabbalist from 550 years ago who was in Spain. And he went to Spain and he met a young man who was a brilliant person, and yet he was a Marrano. He was a Jew who accepted Catholicism in order to save his life. That's how they had to live back then in Spain and in Lisbon and Portugal, the end of the 15th century. 1492, sounds familiar, right? And this young man had taken on Catholicism in order to save his life, but he practiced and he learned Judaism in hidden places, like many Jews did. And then he met this Kabbalist, and he said he got really turned on because he started to get the answers why Jews are so stubborn about their religion and why it's such a beautiful thing. Because when you understand the structure of the universe, then everything else starts to fall into place and make sense. And so, to make a long story short, this gentleman, I'm not going to use names because it might not look so nice, but this gentleman decided to come out in the open with his Judaism after he was already considered a Marrano. Now we have to understand something very important about the Inquisition in Spain. The people they went after were not the Jews that stayed Jewish and that fled. They let them go out. Of course, a lot died on the road, I'm sure. But they went after the Jews who were faking Catholicism. And by the way, this was all inspired by the Vatican. It wasn't an independent operation between Queen Isabella. There were many popes that conspired with other kings around Europe to produce these types of horrible events. And this Jew, when he came out, guess what happened? I think his name was King John. He took him. He interviewed him. He said, take him, burn him. He's a fake Catholic. He's not a Catholic. He's a Jew. And they burned him at the stake. Now, it's not such a pretty story, but the irony is that the Torah tells a Jew it's better to die being Jewish than to fake being non-Jewish. To fake being Catholic in order to save your life, because in the end he got burnt anyways. So if he had been burnt as a Jew the first time, he would have gone to the highest places in heaven, like all the people in the Holocaust. But instead, he had to suffer the humility and the disgrace of being dragged out and burnt as a fake Catholic. So this story is a little bit harsh, I'm afraid, for some people, but you know what? It helps us understand why we have the Torah and why we have to keep this document. Because otherwise humanity is lost, in my opinion. So we want to make God happy. Find those little things that only you can do. Only you can call your parents and say, hi, I was just thinking about you, Dad. I love you. Only you can do that. That's a mitzvah d'oraita. That's one of the 10 commandments. Picking up the phone and calling your parents, even if you don't like them. Even if you hate them. Because if you hate somebody, you still love them deep inside. Okay. So this question is a question that we can keep answering all our lives. How do I make God happy? Well, it depends. Every day is a new situation. Every day is a new opportunity to fulfill this idea. Oh, here's an interesting question. This fellow that wrote me this question, I know him a little bit. Unfortunately, he suffered a lot from drugs. But he heard me mention the chemical substance DMT. And that substance is a psychoactive material that some people have used to have hallucinogenic trips. Thank God I've never done it, but from what I've heard, it's like about 3 minutes of death. That literally you leave your body and you're no longer you, and you leave the physical plane altogether and you die. Now what's very interesting is that acacia wood is one of the natural substances in the planet that has a high concentration of DMT in it. Now I don't know the chemical, the name from which the Russian Tevot, the Notricone DMT stands for, but I'm sure some of you do. Regardless, this substance is found in acacia wood. And guess what? When God commanded Moses to make the Ark of the Covenant, he commanded him of all the trees to make it out of acacia wood. Isn't that interesting? It seems kind of interesting to me. Why, of all the trees, would God command Moses to take acacia trees and cut them down and make beautiful boards and to create the Ark of the Covenant, the holiest of the holies? The box that did miracles wherever it went. The box that transcended time and space. The box that had the 10 Commandments in it and the staff of Aaron that had the 72-letter name engraved in it. The box that had the original broken live. That box, the Ark of the Covenant, contains the holiest items that have come to the earth in the name of God. And why did God put it in acacia wood? So I was thinking about it, and it makes a little sense. How? Because if this material contains this hallucinogenic substance that makes you go out of your body, how is that somehow connected to the fact that this box was out of time and space also? That the rabbis even tell us that the Levi'im did not carry the box carried them. That hills would be leveled and that they could go places very fast when they were carrying that box. They transcended space. Isn't that interesting? That the substance of the box is known for being able to produce that result in the human mind. That there's a center in the human mind that is built for transcendental experience. Now, don't anybody go out there tonight and say, oh, Avraham Shira said we should take DMT. I know there are people that think like that. Unfortunately, when you're a therapist, you'd be surprised what people will say about you. But it should make us wonder about the amazing integration of nature and spirituality that God has shown us through the construction of the articles of the Beit HaMikdash, of the vessels that we're still looking for, the reason why the Beit HaMikdash was such a holy place, the reason why nobody could stand there, the reason why people found it difficult to sleep there and were not allowed to sleep there, because it was the type of place that lifted you out of yourself. And of course, that's why people take drugs. They don't want to be in themselves. But when you practice the Torah properly, and you learn, and you pray, and you give of yourself, you leave yourself in holy, happy ways, not in drug-induced ways. Drugs are for people who are sick. But I don't have to stay sick my whole life. Even though Big Pharma might tell you differently, I'm sorry. The purpose of taking drugs is to keep you from killing yourself. The purpose is to keep you stable enough until you can heal properly. So we see that these little connections are out there if we know how to look for them. And I think if we are open to the Torah, to proper prayer and meditation, and we learn Kabbalah, and we heal ourselves, and we know how to say we're sorry, both to our fellow man and to the Creator, and we can even say we're sorry to dead people, because there's no such thing as death in Torah. People go out to the grave every year of their parents. They light a candle, they say Kaddish, they ask their parents to forgive them perhaps of something they didn't even remember that they did. Rabbi Natan of Breslov says you can do, this is a funny one, you can do tshuva, repent on the fact that you kicked your mother when you were inside her womb. Now, come on, you're not even born yet. And yet that should just help us open our mind a little bit to the idea of what pain is. Because everything is recorded in heaven, all the good that we've done, and anything that we have done that we're not proud of, we need to erase that as soon as we can, because the big light is coming down, and the world is progressing towards the great redemption that all of humanity is waiting for. So it's been an interesting evening answering some of these questions, and I encourage you to write them in more. You can reach us at patreon.com/Rabbi Avraham Shira. And we look forward to your questions. We hope to have this question and answer session every month. And of course, this will be in archives on Facebook for other friends who might want to see it. And hopefully, people will get something that they can use to really help them heal. And something they might not have heard before. So we've dealt with the question of gender identity. We've dealt with the question of how to make God happy. We've even talked about DMT. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more interesting subjects to talk about next month and in the coming months. So God bless all of you. Have a great evening. Wherever you are, a great day. And as the world turns, as they say, we should find new great ways to make God happy. All the best.